Stellar Blade just had its PC release over a week ago, with it currently receiving very positive reviews. I'm just here to give my thoughts on it, if I think it's worth a buy or is it really just a gooner game like some people say it is. This will be spoiler free, so no need to worry about that. I have also 100% of the game, so this is coming from the perspective of someone who's done all the quests, collected all the cans, done all the endings, and so on and so forth. But with that said, let's just get into it and start off with what I consider to be one of the weaker aspects of Stellar Blade, that being the story. To give a brief overview for those unfamiliar, you play as Eve, who's a member of an airborne squadron that gets dropped to Earth with the objective to reclaim it from the creatures called Nativas. Over the course of the game, there's some twists and turns. You learn more about the history of the game, world, how things came to be, but the general premise is that you're there to wipe out the Nativas. Now, I thought the story was just alright. It didn't really get me invested, but at the same time, it's passable enough to where I didn't really lose all interest in it. Definitely don't go into it expecting that you're going to get the next Nier or anything, but still, for being one of the weaker parts of the game, I don't necessarily think it's just flat out bad or anything. As for the side quests, they kind of come in two flavors, one being these bulletin board requests, which can range anywhere from a simple fetch request to a more long drawn out period that revolves around finding secrets to crack a code. The other flavor is more in line with typical side quests where you receive them from an NPC and slightly more involved, having at least a little bit of a storyline to them. Now, I feel pretty much the same way about the side quests as I do the main story. Nothing special, kind of a mixed bag with some being bad and others being like decent to good. I think there was some lost potential here where they had quests leaving me with thoughts like, is that it? Or occasionally the feeling after completing a quest where things kind of felt unresolved. But, while I think they could have been better, I never really found any of them to be a nuisance to get through, and seeing as they are optional, you're never really forced to do them. On to the next topic where I think Stellar Blades lands more on the weaker side than anything, that being the characters. I feel like they kind of fall into just a fine category, where I wouldn't really consider them to be bad, but I also never really felt like I'd consider them to be good either, at least for the main trio of Eve, Lily, and Adam. I feel like given their screen time and importance to the main story, they didn't really leave a lasting impression on me. There are a few others that would probably fall into a category of good for what they are, given their lack of importance to the main story, so quick shout out to Clyde, Kaya, and pretty much any vendor that had side quests attached to them. I'm sure others might have a stronger opinion on things like the characters and the story, but for me personally, I wasn't really playing this game looking for some amazing story or the next Geralt, so my expectations on this were more or less met. But speaking of what I was playing Stellar Blade for, now we can move on to sections where I start praising the game a bit. So with that said, let's talk about some gameplay. As far as what to expect from it, I'd say at its core it's a hack and slash, but not to the same extent as something like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. Like, you're not going to be juggling enemies with combos or anything, as for the most part, you won't really be stunned by your attacks, so you want to balance doing combos but not overcommitting so you'll still be able to react to enemy attacks. On top of this, of course, you have other typical action game mechanics like skills, parrying, and dodging, which all of this blends together to make a pretty unique experience as far as action games go, and what I'd consider to be just a pretty solid combat system overall. It never feels like any one mechanic is underutilized, and the bosses are designed to make full use of all the game's mechanics. For instance, bosses have moves that are unparryable, so you have to dodge them, but for the most part parrying is incentivized because enough parries will open up the boss to an execution attack. On top of this, you also have these two skills called Repulse and Blink, where if the enemy attacks glows blue, then you need to dodge into them at the right time, so you're able to teleport behind them and get some free hits in. If it glows purple, then you need to dodge away to temporarily open up a weak spot and stun the boss. This just adds one additional layer of depth onto the combat, and honestly it might be my favorite addition just for the simple fact that 1, it's fun to do, and 2, I haven't really seen many other games implement something like it before. As far as the bosses go, I do think the overall boss roster of the game tends to be either decent or good, with a few of them leaning towards the side of being great. But more than anything, I don't think this game ever really has a bad or annoying boss, which is nice to say. Overall, while I do actually think there's a chance people could be slightly put off by the combat as it doesn't play like a standard hack and slash would, I still found it to be pretty enjoyable and unique as far as action games go. Also, this game does have a fishing minigame, so if you're into that, there's that too. Moving on to the next section I like to cover, which is going to be a combination of the progression and the gear system. As you complete quests, examine bodies, and kill Natibas, you'll gain experience which you can use to acquire new skills on one of the 5 skill trees. These typically contain an initial skill, and then each branch off of that would be some sort of upgrade to make that skill better. Plus, there are 2 trees for both the beta and burst skills that act as both your way of obtaining them on top of enhancing them with additional skill points. Now, I don't really have too much to comment on here outside of the fact that it just kind of felt good and natural. Never felt like I was progressing too quick or too slow. And by the later half of the game, I had unlocked enough of the tree where I was able to experience at least all the base skills the game had to offer. So I feel like it did a decent job of not falling into an issue that some other games have, where you wind up unlocking some cool abilities, but only towards the end of the game where you don't really get to see the full benefit of using them. As far as the gear goes, it's pretty much what makes up your build, and it's made up of 2 different pieces, one being your exospine slots and the other being your gadget slots. The exospine makes up more of the backbone of your build, with having 3 preset effects per exoskeleton, assuming they're fully upgraded, and then each gadget just contains a single preset effect. Honestly, I didn't experiment with this too much. I mainly just stuck with some equipment centering around beta skills and added combo damage, occasionally switching to some range-centered exospines and gadgets during some of the sections where you're forced to use the drone. But with that said, I felt like it was a fine system for the game, and I could see the potential for at least a little build diversity, having seen the different exospines and gadgets the game gives you. Another piece I wanted to talk about was the level design and exploration aspect of the game. Just to get the bad out of the way first, this game is probably one of the worst offenders of overusing the yellow paint to direct the player where to go. Like, it's pretty ridiculous. I feel like the game could have definitely dialed that down a ton and just kept the scan feature with the drone that highlights the climbable or interactable objects in the first place, and it would have been completely fine. But even though I consider this bad, it didn't really bother me too much personally. I just don't think it's great from a design perspective, so I thought I'd call it out. As far as the general exploration goes, now that I do like. So this game has a mix of areas that are either pretty open, giving the player some freedom to explore, while others can be pretty linear. To me, the exploration felt pretty good. For one, it is incentivized. This is how you'll get upgrades to increase stuff like your max health, your beta capacity, healing capacity, and drone upgrades. Exploring is also how you'll find a lot of your cosmetics and collectibles. As while some are pretty hard to miss, others will kind of require you to go out of your way to find them. But that never really bothered me, as none of it ever felt tedious to do. Somewhat tied to the exploration, I felt that the enemy density this game had was done well. There were very few times it felt oversaturated, so the moment-to-moment gameplay of just going through the levels and exploring was a plus. Shifting topics, I just wanted to briefly give a shout out to the soundtrack, as it was pretty great and probably my favorite aspect of the game. Some of my favorites were White Knight, Raven, Hypertube, Flooded Commercial Sector, Taki Mode, and Beyond Fate. Now, I'm not a composer or anything, so I don't really have anything to commentate about, but I still feel like it was important to bring up, as I feel like soundtracks in general can almost go undervalued sometimes for just how much they can elevate experiences in a game. You know, imagine if you finished Nier and instead of Weight of the World playing, it's just a decent theme without any vocals. That ending would not hit nearly as hard. Or imagine you're playing Persona 5 Royal and I Believe isn't playing in the background as you're running up the staircase to face the final boss. With that aside, as someone who enjoys listening to game OSTs, it's always nice to experience a soundtrack where I can give it a re-listen and add some new songs to my playlist. Did want to cover a quick section that most people might not care about, but still just wanted to talk about Stellar Blade from a completionist perspective, for those who also might be into 100%ing games like I am. Having said that, it took me roughly 40 to 45 hours or so to get all the achievements, while also making sure to do a little bit extra like completing all the quests. It is required that you do at least 2 playthroughs to get everything, as there are achievements tied to beating New Game Plus, on top of the fact that there are 3 endings, in which each one is a different achievement, which you can only get at most 2 per playthrough. The achievements themselves were not bad at all. A vast majority you'll just get by playing the game, and I think the only missables are tied to a missable area, but if you're doing all the side content when playing, you won't miss this. I think the main achievement you want to watch out for is the activated all camps one, as there are a ton of camps, and outside of the open areas, you really won't be able to tell which ones you've activated and which ones you haven't. So just a heads up on that to make sure you're activating all the camps you come across. So the final thing I want to cover before getting into the conclusion is just a list of a few pros that I want to bring up, but don't really have much to say on. The first being that New Game Plus has additional features like enhanced exospines and gadgets to find, new exosuits and cosmetics, and new skills to unlock. As someone who tends to play games multiple times, it's always kind of nice to have some things there to freshen up the experience when running through the game again. This game does have a boss refight mode, which is always a plus to me for any game that has boss fights in it. Visually, the game looks great and runs great as well. I know it's almost a low bar to praise a game for running well, but in 2025, with just how poorly optimized games and PC ports are coming out, I feel like I gotta bring this up since it's such a nice change of pace compared to what unfortunately feels like the norm nowadays. And lastly, I know this game does have some Gooner game allegations tied to it, but honestly, outside of maybe an interestingly angled cutscene or two, I don't think the game ever really forces any sort of fan service onto the player. But, I'm not going to try and sit here and act like there aren't any Gooner elements to the game. I mean, just look at some of the outfits Eve has and some of the poses she can do in photo mode. At the same time, it's entirely up to the player on whether they want to interact with this or not. It kind of goes back to the saying of you control the buttons you press, so this game really is as much of a Gooner game as you want it to be. So, the final verdict. Do I think this game is good, or is it really just a game for Gooners to enjoy? I'm sure you can probably tell by all my previous commentary, but I do think this game is good. Now, is this game going to land anywhere on a favorite game list of mine? No, but at the end of the day, I don't regret spending $60 for the game. I got roughly 45 hours out of it and generally had a solid time playing through it. I think if you're into action games like me, then it's worth a buy. If you're into action games but are still on the fence about it, I think waiting for a sale is definitely a valid option. That being said, if you're wanting to pick this up looking for it to be the next Nier, at least from a story perspective, then I don't think this game is for you. So yeah, that's it. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. This is my first time ever making a video like this, so it probably sucks, so any feedback there is welcome. And not sure if I'll do something like this again, or if I'll simply just go back to my comfort zone of doing boss kills in Souls games, as it took much longer to throw this together than I thought it would, and also having to listen to my voice when editing this kind of makes me want to apologize to everyone I've ever talked to. But yeah, thanks again if you made it this far, but that's all I got. Bye bye.